The Ashworth dining room fell silent when the Duke arrived late to his wife's birthday dinner, and 40 guests watched as Eleonora, Duchess of Ashworth, removed her wedding ring with steady hands and placed it on the white porcelain plate before the young woman on her husband's arm. The candles guttered in their silver holders, casting long shadows across the Madeleine Voss's pale face as the ring rolled once, twice, then settled with a sound like a coin dropped into a well. Eleonora lifted her glass, the crystal catching the light, and her voice carried across the room with perfect clarity. "Happy birthday to me." She drank alone while 40 people held their breath, then rose from her chair and walked toward the door, her silk skirts whispering against the floor like secrets finally spoken aloud. The Duke's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. His hand still rested at Madeleine's elbow, frozen in the gesture of escorting her into the room, and his eyes followed his wife's retreating figure with an expression that might have been confusion or shock. It was difficult to tell which, and Eleonora did not turn back to see. She had spent 7 years reading his face across breakfast tables and ballrooms, and she no longer had the energy to interpret what she saw there. In the corridor beyond the dining room, Charlotte watched from the staircase in her white nightgown, her small hands gripping the banister. She was 6 years old, and her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders because Ada had not yet braided it for bed. Charlotte spoke softly. "Mama, why did you give the lady your ring?" Eleonora stopped at the base of the stairs. She looked up at her daughter, and for a moment her composure wavered, not visibly, but in some interior way that only Charlotte might have sensed. Then she climbed the stairs and knelt beside the child, taking both small hands in her own. "Because it was not mine anymore, darling," Eleonora said. "But Papa gave it to you." She nodded. "Yes, he did." "Did you give it back?" "In a manner of speaking." Charlotte's brow furrowed in the way it did when she was trying to understand something the adults around her seemed to grasp instinctively. "Is Papa angry?" "I do not know," Eleonora said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. She had no idea what Marcus felt, because she had stopped being able to read him years ago, or perhaps he had stopped giving her anything to read. "Come. Ada will braid your hair and you will go to sleep, and in the morning we will have toast with jam." "Will Papa be there?" "I do not think so." Charlotte accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who had learned not to expect her father at breakfast. Eleonora carried her up the remaining stairs, and behind them the dining room door remained closed. The murmur of voices rose and fell like a tide, punctuated by the sharp sound of a glass breaking and someone's stifled laugh. The party continued without the Duchess. It did not continue well. 7 years earlier, Eleonora Vane had married Marcus Vane, Duke of Ashworth, in the chapel at Montrose Hall with 200 guests in attendance, and her father weeping openly in the front pew. She was 24, the daughter of the Earl of Montrose, and she had been educated in French, Italian, music, and the management of large households. Marcus was 30, newly ascended to the dukedom after his father's death. And he had looked at her during the ceremony with an expression she had interpreted as love. Perhaps it had been love. She no longer knew how to tell the difference between love and attention. Their first dance as husband and wife took place at the Montrose Ball, 3 hours after the ceremony. The ballroom was filled with white roses. Eleonora had arranged them herself, spending 2 days with the gardener to ensure the arrangements were perfect. And Marcus had led her onto the floor with his hand at her waist and his eyes on her face. "You arranged the flowers," he said as they turned beneath the chandeliers. She smiled. "Yes. And I believe you also seated the guests in a manner that prevented Lord Ashcroft from murdering the Chancellor. They have a history." "So I am told." Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had discovered something unexpected and valuable. "You are the only person here who arranged the flowers and knows every MP present." Eleonora looked up at him. "You noticed." "I noticed." It was the last time he said it. Over the next 7 years, Eleonora transformed Ashworth into one of the finest estates in the county. She established a school for the tenants' children, renegotiated the lease agreements to prevent 3 families from losing their homes, and hosted 18 political dinners that secured Marcus's position in the House of Lords. She managed the household accounts, corresponded with his solicitor, and ensured that every guest who arrived at Ashworth left with a favorable impression of the Duke's hospitality and influence. Marcus signed what she organized and attended the dinners she arranged. He thanked her occasionally, in the manner one might thank a competent steward. And over time he stopped seeing her as a person and began seeing her as a permanent feature of his life. Like the estate itself, or the title he had inherited, Charlotte was born in the 2nd year of their marriage, and Eleonora raised her daughter with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. She read to Charlotte every evening, taught her to recognize flowers in the garden, and held her when she woke from nightmares. Marcus visited the nursery once a week and patted Charlotte's head with the distracted affection of a man whose thoughts were elsewhere. Madeline Voss entered Marcus's life in the 6th year of his marriage. She was 26, a merchant's widow with a modest inheritance and a laugh that made men feel interesting. Marcus did not fall in love with her, not in the grand, consuming way of novels. But she reflected him as someone worth noticing, and Eleonora had long since stopped reflecting anything except the smooth operation of his household. Eleonora became invisible to him, not through neglect, but through permanence. She was always there, always capable, always managing the details of his life, with such seamless efficiency that he forgot she was doing it at all. When he looked at her across the breakfast table, he saw the Duchess of Ashworth, not Eleonora Vane. When she spoke, he heard the voice of his household, not the woman he had married. And when he brought Madeline Voss to Eleonora's birthday dinner, he did so without calculating the cruelty, because it had not occurred to him that Eleonora was someone who could be hurt. The dower house sat a quarter-mile from the main estate, separated by a low stone wall and a row of elm trees. It was smaller than the main house, only 12 rooms, but it had large windows that faced east, and in the morning the light filled the drawing room with a warmth that Eleonora had not felt in years. She moved into the dower house the morning after her birthday with Charlotte, Ada, and 2 trunks of clothing. She left behind the rest, her correspondence, her household ledgers, the unsent letters she had written across 7 years and never delivered. She also left a sealed envelope addressed to the Duke's steward, containing 47 items of instruction. The list detailed everything she had been managing: the tenants' lease renewals, the schedule for repairing the north wing roof, the names of the 3 MPs who required personal letters before the autumn session, the grocer who delivered on Tuesdays, the housekeeper's daughter who needed a reference for a position in London, the specific blend of tea the Duke preferred at breakfast, and the fact that Charlotte's governess required payment by the 1st of the month or she would leave for a position in Bath. Marcus read the list for the first time 3 days after Eleonora's departure. He sat in his study with the pages spread across his desk, and for the first time in 7 years, he saw the architecture of his own life. It was vast, intricate, and entirely dependent on a woman he had stopped noticing. He sent a note to the dower house requesting a meeting. Eleonora returned the note unopened. The estate continued, but the household began to fray at the edges. The housekeeper came to Marcus with questions about the linen order. The steward asked about the tenants' Christmas baskets. The cook wanted to know whether the Duke would host his annual shooting party, and if so, which guests required accommodations for dietary restrictions. Marcus answered what he could and avoided what he could not. He attended Parliament, signed documents his solicitor placed before him, and tried not to think about the fact that his wife had removed herself from his life with the same quiet efficiency she had once used to run it. 2 weeks after the birthday dinner, Marcus arrived at the Dower House with a plan. He had spent the previous evening drafting it with Lord Ashcroft, and it was a good plan. Practical, sensible, and designed to resolve the situation with minimal scandal. Ada opened the door and led him to the drawing room, where Eleonora sat by the window with a book in her lap. She did not stand when he entered, and she did not set the book aside. He cleared his throat. Eleonora. Your Grace. The formality stung, though he could not have said why. He crossed the room and stood before her, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture he used when addressing Parliament. I have come to discuss our situation, he said. Have you? Yes. I believe we can manage this with a public reconciliation. A dinner, perhaps, or a ball. We will appear together, and the county will see that the incident was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. He nodded. Yes. I handed your ring to another woman in front of 40 people, Eleonora said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. Which part of that did you misunderstand? Marcus shifted his weight. I understand you were upset. Upset? Yes. Eleonora closed her book and set it on the table beside her chair. She looked at him with an expression he could not read. You came here with a plan. I did. You have never once come to me without one, she said. Try arriving with nothing and see what happens. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but she stood and walked to the door, opening it in a gesture that was both polite and absolute. Good day, Your Grace, she said. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and he stood in the corridor for a long moment before returning to his carriage. 4 days later, Charlotte caught a fever. Ada sent word to the main house, and Marcus arrived at the Dower House within the hour. He found Eleonora in Charlotte's room, sitting beside the bed with a damp cloth in her hand and her hair loose around her shoulders. How is she? Marcus asked. The fever is high, Eleonora said. She did not look at him. The doctor has been. He said it should break by morning. May I sit with her? Eleonora hesitated, then nodded. Marcus pulled a chair to the opposite side of the bed and took Charlotte's small hand in his. The child stirred but did not wake, and her skin was hot to the touch. They sat in silence as the hours passed. Eleonora refreshed the cloth on Charlotte's forehead every 20 minutes, and Marcus held his daughter's hand and watched the rise and fall of her chest. At 3 a.m, the fever broke. Charlotte's breathing eased, and her skin cooled beneath Marcus's palm. He looked up and saw that Eleonora had fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted against the cushion and her hands folded in her lap. He stayed where he was, unwilling to wake her, and sometime before dawn he also fell asleep with Charlotte's hand still in his. When Eleonora woke, the room was gray with early light. Marcus was asleep in the chair across from her, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. Charlotte slept peacefully between them, her fever gone. Eleonora stood and crossed to the wardrobe, pulling out a blanket. She returned to Marcus's chair and placed the blanket over his shoulders, her hand resting briefly on the back of his neck. His skin was warm, and she felt the steady pulse of blood beneath her fingers. She withdrew her hand after 3 seconds and returned to her chair. Marcus did not wake. The birthday scandal became the season's subject. Hostesses who had once competed for the Duke's attendance now hedged their invitations, citing limited space or prior commitments. Lord Ashcroft remained loyal, but other allies grew distant, unwilling to associate themselves with a man whose wife had publicly humiliated him. Marcus attended fewer dinners and spent more time at his club, where the whispers followed him into every room. He told himself it did not matter. that the scandal would fade, that the county's memory was short. But the isolation deepened with each passing week. Lady Pemberton, who had hosted the Duke and Duchess at her summer ball for 6 consecutive years, sent her regrets for the autumn season. No explanation was provided. 5 weeks after the birthday dinner, Lord Ashcroft visited Eleanora at the Dower House. He arrived unannounced, and Ada showed him into the drawing room with a disapproving expression that suggested she knew exactly why he had come. "Lady Ashworth," Ashcroft said, bowing. "Lord Ashcroft." Eleanora gestured to the chair across from her. "Tea?" He shook his head. "No, thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, and Ashcroft studied her with the careful attention of a man who was trying to decide how to begin a difficult conversation. "I should have come sooner," he said finally. "Why did you not?" "Because I was a coward." Eleanora almost smiled. "That is honest." "I told him 3 years ago that you were unhappy," Ashcroft said. "I told him he was losing you, and that if he did not pay attention, you would leave." Eleanora's hand stilled in her lap. "What did he say?" "He said, Eleanora is never unhappy. She is not built for it." The words landed like stones in still water. Eleanora looked away, her gaze fixed on the window and the garden beyond. "I should have told you then," Ashcroft said. "I should have warned you that he did not see what was happening." Her voice was quiet. "I knew. I simply hoped I was wrong." Ashcroft stood and crossed to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "He is suffering now, if that matters to you." "It does not. I thought it might not." He left, and the room felt larger in his absence. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, a letter arrived at the Dower House. It was delivered by the Duke's solicitor, sealed with the Ashworth crest, and addressed to the Duchess in formal script. Ada brought it to Eleanora on a silver tray. Eleanora looked at the letter for a long moment, then picked it up and returned it to the tray unopened. "Take this back to the main house," Eleanora said. "Tell the solicitor that if the Duke wishes to speak to me, he will have to use his own hand and his own words." Ada's expression did not change, but her eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. She returned the letter that afternoon, and the Duke's solicitor reported the message verbatim. Marcus sat in his study and stared at the unopened letter for an hour before placing it in the drawer of his desk. 7 weeks after the birthday dinner, Madeleine Voss arrived at the Dower House in a hired carriage. She wore a dark blue traveling dress and no jewelry, and she carried a small velvet pouch in her gloved hand. Ada showed her into the drawing room with visible reluctance. Eleanora stood when Madeleine entered, and the two women regarded each other in silence. "Lady Ashworth," Madeleine said. "Mrs. Voss." Madeleine crossed the room and held out the velvet pouch. "I came to return this." Eleanora opened the pouch and saw her wedding ring inside, the gold band catching the afternoon light. "I did not know what I was standing in the middle of," Madeleine said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I thought it was an arrangement. Something both of you had agreed to, or at least tolerated. I did not know it was a marriage." "It was not much of one," Eleanora said. "It was more than I understood." Madeleine stepped back, her hands clasped before her. "I am leaving the county. I have family in Derbyshire, and I will stay with them for the foreseeable future. I wanted you to know that I will not return." She inclined her head. "Thank you." Madeleine nodded and left without another word. Eleanora stood in the drawing room with the ring in her hand, and for the first time since the birthday dinner, she felt something shift. A loosening of the knot that had been tightening in her chest for weeks. She placed the ring on the mantelpiece and did not put it on. 8 weeks after the birthday dinner, Marcus entered Eleanora's withdrawing room in the main house. It was a small room on the second floor, overlooking the garden, and Eleonora had used it for her correspondence before moving to the dower house. He had not been inside it in years. The room was exactly as she had left it. Her writing desk stood by the window, the surface clear except for a small porcelain inkwell and a stack of blank paper. The bookshelves were filled with volumes on estate management, political history, and poetry. A chair upholstered in pale blue silk sat beside the fireplace, and a needlework frame leaned against the wall, the canvas half finished. Marcus crossed to the writing desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, he found a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. They were addressed to him in Eleonora's handwriting, and none of them had been sent. He untied the ribbon and began to read. The first letter was dated 3 months after their wedding. My dear Marcus, I think you might be the most interesting man I have ever met, and I'm afraid you will never know it. You spoke at dinner tonight about the reform bill, and I watched Lord Ashcroft lean forward in his chair because he wanted to hear every word. You have that effect on people. You make them want to listen. I wonder if you know that about yourself. Charlotte said your name today in a sentence about horses. She puts you in every sentence. I wonder if you notice. Yours, Eleonora. The second letter was dated 6 months later. My dear Marcus, the Hargrove dinner went well. You thanked Lord Ashcroft for his support, and he was pleased. You did not thank me. I do not think you know. You did not. I spent 2 weeks ensuring that Mrs. Hargrove was seated beside the Chancellor's wife, because they are cousins and have not spoken in 3 years, and their reconciliation will make the Chancellor more amenable to your proposal. You shook my hand when we returned home and told me the evening was a success. I wanted to tell you that it was a success because I made it one, but I did not. I'm not sure you would have heard me. Yours, Eleonora. The third letter was dated 2 years into their marriage. My dear Marcus, I wore the blue silk tonight because you said once that you liked it. That was 3 years ago. I wonder if you remember. You did not look at me during dinner, but you looked at the table and remarked that the flowers were well chosen. I chose them. I choose them every week. I wonder if you know that. Yours, Eleonora. Marcus read every letter. There were dozens of them, spanning 7 years, and they chronicled a marriage he had not known he was living. They were not complaints or accusations. They were observations, questions, and longings, addressed to a man who had never received them. He sat in the chair by the window and held the letters in his lap, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be invisible to someone you loved. The realization did not come as a sudden blow. It came slowly, like water filling a room, until he was submerged in it and could not breathe. He stayed in the withdrawing room for 3 hours, reading and rereading the letters, and when he finally left, he carried them with him. Marcus attempted to write to Eleonora that evening. He sat at his desk with a blank sheet of paper before him, and he wrote 3 sentences before realizing they sounded like a report to Parliament. He crumpled the paper and tried again. The second attempt was worse. He threw it into the fire. The third attempt began with an apology, but the words felt hollow, and he could not find a way to make them mean what he needed them to mean. He gave up after the 4th attempt and went to bed. The next morning, Lord Ashcroft arrived at Ashworth unannounced. He found Marcus in the study, staring at a blank sheet of paper with the expression of a man who had forgotten how to write. You look terrible, Ashcroft said. He grimaced. Thank you. Have you written to her? I have tried. And I do not know how. Ashcroft pulled a chair to the desk and sat down. What are you trying to say? That I am sorry, that I did not see her, that I... Marcus stopped and rubbed his face with both hands. I do not know how to say any of it without sounding like a solicitor drafting terms. Then stop writing to the Duchess of Ashworth, Ashcroft said. Write to Eleonora. Marcus looked at him. What is the difference? Everything. That afternoon, Charlotte arrived at the main house with Ada. She found her father in the study, surrounded by crumpled sheets of paper, and she climbed into his lap without asking permission. Papa? Charlotte said. Are you writing to Mama? I am trying. Why is it hard? Because I do not know what to say. Charlotte considered this. You could draw her a picture. Mama likes horses. Marcus almost smiled. I do not think a picture will be enough. Then write about something you remember. Mama says remembering is important. Charlotte kissed his cheek and climbed down, and Ada led her back to the dower house. Marcus sat alone in the study and thought about what his daughter had said. That evening, he wrote a letter. It was awkward and uncertain, but it was his own. Eleonora, I read the letter you wrote 3 months after our wedding. You said I was the most interesting man you had ever met, and that you were afraid I would never know it. You were right. I did not know it, because I was not looking at you. I was looking at my own life, and I thought you were part of the furniture. I am sorry. I do not know how to say it better than that. Marcus. He sent the letter to the dower house the next morning. Eleonora read the letter in her drawing room, with the morning light falling across the page. She read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the drawer of her writing desk. She did not reply. Marcus wrote again the following week. Eleonora, Charlotte is learning to ride. I took her to the stables yesterday, and she sat on the mare with her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles were white. She was terrified, but she would not admit it. When the mare took 3 steps, Charlotte looked at me and smiled, and I saw you in her face. The same determination, the same refusal to show fear. I do not know if you will read this. I hope you do. Marcus. Eleonora read the letter in the drawing room, and when she finished, she cried. Not for the content, but because Marcus had described Charlotte's face with the same attention she had used in her unsent letters. She still did not reply. The letters continued, 1 per week, every week, arriving at the dower house in plain envelopes with no formal seal. Marcus wrote about Charlotte, about the estate, about the breakfast room where the light came through the windows at dawn, and reminded him of mornings he had not noticed when Eleonora was sitting across from him. He wrote about the first time he had seen her at the Montrose ball, and how she had been standing beside the roses with her hands folded and her head tilted as though she were listening to something no one else could hear. He wrote about the blue dress she had worn to the Hargrove dinner, and how he had not told her she looked beautiful because he had assumed she already knew. He wrote about the letters he had found in her withdrawing room, and how reading them had felt like discovering a person he had lived beside for 7 years without ever meeting. By the 12th week, Eleonora walked to the boundary wall between the dower house and the estate after reading his letter. She did not plan to go. She simply found herself there, standing beside the low stone wall with her hands resting on the cold surface. Marcus was on the other side, not by arrangement, but by habit. He had taken to walking the boundary every evening, and he looked up when he saw her. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Eleonora placed her hand on top of the wall, palm down. Marcus placed his beside it, and the stone separated their skin, but the warmth passed through the gaps. Neither of them spoke. After 10 minutes, Eleonora withdrew her hand and returned to the dower house. By the 14th week, Marcus wrote about the exact shade of her hair in the light of the breakfast room. Brown, but with threads of gold when the sun came through the windows. And Eleonora understood he was finally looking. She walked to her bedroom and opened the drawer where she had placed her wedding ring. She took it out and slid it onto her finger. not as reconciliation, but as acknowledgement that something had shifted. The ring felt heavier than she remembered. The 21st week arrived in late autumn. Eleanora woke before dawn and dressed in a simple gray gown. She walked to the main house as the sky lightened, and she entered through the kitchen door to avoid the staff. The breakfast room was empty, except for Marcus, who sat at the table with 20 letters stacked beside the chair where Eleanora used to sit. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them moved. "I did not know if you would come," Marcus said. She met his eyes. "I said I would." Eleanora crossed the room and sat in her chair. Marcus slid the 21st letter across the table, and she unfolded it with steady hands. She read it in silence. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Marcus's careful script, and it described the morning after their wedding, how she had poured his tea without asking how he took it, because she had already learned his preferences, and how he had not noticed because he had been reading the newspaper. The letter ended with a single sentence. "I am looking now." Eleanora folded the letter and placed it in her pocket. Then she picked up the teapot and poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one across the table to Marcus. They drank in silence as the sun rose. Weeks later, the breakfast room was filled with the sound of Charlotte's voice as she described a caterpillar she had found in the garden. She was convinced it had 11 legs, and no amount of correction from her mother would persuade her otherwise. "Caterpillars have many legs, darling," Eleanora said, "but not 11. Charlotte was adamant. "This one did. I counted." Marcus was writing at the table. Not political correspondence, but another letter to Eleanora. She watched him with an expression that was half amusement, half exasperation. "You are writing to me while I am sitting across from you," Eleanora said. "You are the only person I want to tell about the caterpillar." Marcus replied without looking up. Eleanora reached across the table, and Marcus met her halfway. Their fingers intertwined, and Charlotte looked up from her toast. "You are both being very peculiar," Charlotte said. Eleanora smiled. "Yes." "May I have more toast?" She nodded. "Yes." The ring was on Eleanora's finger, placed there the morning she had read the 14th letter, and understood that Marcus was finally looking at her, not at the Duchess of Ashworth. Neither of them was performing. Neither of them was proving anything. They were simply 2 people at a table, who had arrived there by 21 letters and 7 years of learning to be visible.